Career criminals with more than 100 convictions are being spared jail time. Reports suggest that the number of people with multiple convictions avoiding prison nearly tripled between 2007 to 2023. Well, data from the Ministry of Justice also shows that the proportion of criminals walking free from court has quadrupled in the past 16 years. In another blow for the police, a separate report of the Metropolitan Police issued today found that the force is underperforming in 7 out of 8 areas reviewed and is also failing to investigate crimes and manage offenders adequately. Now, these damning reports, of course, all come in the wake of the recent disorder we've seen on our streets, with two-tier policing and two-tier justice dominating the conversation. So, again, what is going on in British policing? Well, joining me now is the chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation, Rick Pryor. Rick, welcome to the show. Absolutely damning set of stats. Once again, Mr. Pryor, over 100 convictions being spared jails, 4,000 such cases, a 400% increase in 16 years, an astonishing failure, and yet we're locking people up for posting offensive things on Facebook. What's your take?
Well, it's what I've termed the devastation and destruction to policing that was caused by Theresa May and the last government since 2010, stripping police numbers and police budgets down to the bone. And it's the actions of that last government that we haven't been able to recover from. We've recruited extra numbers. It's always a statistics game with the government. They quote back to us numbers, but what they fail to appreciate is the speed at which those numbers have increased and the inability of the Met to properly retain officers in the roles is meaning that we've got a crisis of experience in the Metropolitan Police Service currently, with the Commissioner predicting that up to a third of our workforce are going to have under 4 years service by next year. And that is having a massive impact. Officers are under an unbearable amount of pressure to do an unfeasible amount of work. And as a consequence, shortcuts will be found and crimes won't get investigated properly. And it's all of a result of the appalling cuts that were made by Theresa May.
OK, so it seems a bit of an easy way out to say it's a question of resource. It's politicians. What about priorities? Why are the police policing tweets and not streets? We're seeing people being locked up for Facebook posts, for tweets, for offensive things they've said, with no actual real-world consequences. This is real crime, real criminals, real lives being destroyed. It's not enough to say it's the former Prime Minister's fault. It's your job to lock up criminals, actual criminals, not people who are posting things on Facebook.
Well, the Commissioner is prioritising frontline policing, but unfortunately, there's a very thin amount of officers to spread over an ever-increasing amount of work. At the moment, because of the lack of experience that I've just told you about, particularly on the front line, we're taking experienced detectives away from specialist units such as jigsaw units that investigate sex offenders, for example, which was cited in that HMIC report. And we're diluting the experience in those units and to bolster the front line. So the Commissioner's doing his best to try to mitigate an impossible situation. That HMIC report that you referred to highlights certain failures in around the the management of sex offenders. And
Rick, can I ask you specifically about that? Because one of the most astonishing things in a truly eviscerating set of information here is that the report found that in several areas of London, the Metropolitan Police Force was warning sex offenders that they were going to be visited rather than just turning up for spot checks. That's not a question of resource, it's a question of incompetence.
It's unacceptable. The sex offenders shouldn't be warned that they're going to be visited. However, as I said before, unbearable pressure on officers who do an unfeasible amount of work results in shortcuts being found. And with the workload that officers have, if they've already visited an address 3 times and it's taken them an hour to go from one side of one of these super boroughs now to the other side to do a check, and on 3 occasions they've not been able to speak to the offender, then they'll be making these poor decisions to lessen the workload and to be able to at least tick off some of the work that has to be done. They're facing an incredible amount of pressure to do an enormous amount of work, and something has to give at some point. That is a bare fact.
And what's having to give is that people aren't being banged up, and what's having to give is that you're tipping off sex offenders before you knock on the door. An astonishing state of affairs. Rick Pryor, chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation, thanks for joining us. What do you make of that? Well, joining now to discuss this in the studio is the former Tory MP and the Minister Ranil Jayawardena, and also the former Labour advisor Matthew Torbett. Let's start with you, Ranil. What do you make of that? I just thought that was incredible. Serious shortfalls, being quantified, being laid out. The data is unavoidable. All he did was blame Theresa May and blame police numbers. It's not about numbers, it's about the priorities, surely.
You're absolutely right. Priorities are important. Numbers are important too. There are now more police on the streets than there were in 2010, so I don't think the argument that was put forward stacks up. But the priorities are key. And there does seem to be this obsession in the Labour Party and in the Lib Dems with community sentencing, community punishments, which just don't work. People are protected if criminals, hardened criminals, are in prison. And when, 50% of all crimes are being committed by less than 10% of the criminals, I think we can say that prison would work.
Matthew, what's your take on that? I mean, I just think people look at this and they think, have the police completely lost their way? Have they completely lost a sense of priority? The idea that serial criminals are just going walkies and they're enjoying their liberty, and a first-time offender, a girl of 13 this week in Aldershot, who would now face a criminal record for being at a protest. Have the police just totally lost their sense of priority?
Possibly. What I'd like to do is directly challenge what you've just said about community sentencing. Why do you think community sentencing doesn't work?
If people are out on the streets, as they are right now, they're committing repeat offences, and the stats show that. This is verified statistics. These aren't mine. These are other people's. And, half of all crime being committed by repeat offenders, less than 10% of the offenders. These are people who are not being challenged in a meaningful way. More crime seems to get them off time. And actually what we need is tougher sentencing, putting these people who are creating great misery for people across this country. Well, I'm pleased to see there's clarity here that Labour don't want to lock up these criminals.
No, I'm going to speak to you now.
The truth is that these people need to be locked up to protect the public.
OK, Matthew.
I'd like to challenge that as someone that's been through a community sentencing programme. And I'm sat here in a studio right now in front of you, not committing crime on the streets. So
but too many people are.
Just let me speak. I'll let you speak. It's about whether prison works and whether sentencing full-time works. The whole point of prison is supposed to be punishment, deterrence, incapacitation and rehabilitation. Now, the punishment goes some way because you can either lock somebody up, take all their liberties away. That's the ultimate punishment. What I did, I use myself as an example for this a lot because I've got skin in the game. I was homeless as a teenager due to a family breakdown. I slept on the streets of Manchester and was groomed into a gang. I then was sentenced to 12 months in prison. I didn't go to prison because it was a suspended sentence. I saw that as a second chance at life. Now, what I couldn't do is gain gainful employment for the next decade, and I had to work hard to convince people that I wasn't, a ragtag sort of scumbag or whatever else. I was someone that had fallen by the wayside. A lot of crime is committed through poverty and through people that are vulnerable. Not all, and I don't reserve this for people like sex offenders and murderers, and there's a different kettle of fish altogether there. Now, if my best friend's mum didn't take me in, I still had nowhere to go. I would have continued committing crime, because if it's between stealing and starving, you're more than likely going to steal, because otherwise you're not surviving. That's as simple as it is. I think prison doesn't currently work because it punishes, absolutely. It doesn't rehabilitate. And as a Conservative, and then I will let you in, reoffending costs the Home Office nearly £20 billion a year. That money could be used for so much good. And community sentencing isn't for everybody, but I think we're sending so many people to prison, the same as James Timpson has said, the prisons minister, 2/3 of people shouldn't even be there in the first place. The fact you can't get on in life is a punishment in itself in many ways.
Well, I salute you for rebuilding your life, but the truth is, as you set out, that you wanted to change. You wanted to do better. And I'm sorry to say, the statistics show too many people don't. And when people don't want to change, because I agree, if people want to change, if people want to live a better life, I'm all for that. That's something that generations of people in this country have believed in. But if people don't want to change, the law-abiding majority, the British public, deserve to be protected, and that's what prison does.
But if you want to change, but there isn't the opportunity, and this is what I always come back to, I only got out of that cycle, or what could have been a cycle, because I was given an opportunity. If you don't have the opportunity, and we see this, described as career criminals with hundreds of things, hundreds of, crimes that they've committed, have they been given opportunity? Now, they might have done, and therefore, something needs to be done. I agree. But ultimately, I think if you're in that cycle, it actually becomes easier to be inside than out, because you're a jobless layabout, nobody respects you on the outside. If you're inside, people in prison know who you are.
So we should stop people getting into that cycle in the first place.
I
and
agree.
That's why education is so important. I talked about that in my maiden speech many moons ago. And people in this country are blessed with a fantastic free education across this country. We have now the best standards in reading and maths in the Western world. That's a great start for anyone who wants it. And, I would encourage everyone to do that. I'd encourage parents to encourage their children to do that. But there will be cases where people don't want to take that path. And I do come back to the point that the public do need protection from people who want to do them harm. That's what the job of government is. And, a big test ahead for the Labour government as to whether they're going to rise to that challenge, because, previously Labour governments and Lib Dems have wanted to prioritise community sentencing over that sense of protection for the public. So it's a big test for the government in the weeks, months, years ahead.
So how do you explain crime going up under the last Conservative government?
Well, actually, crime fell, bar fraud. Fraud went up. I accept that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm a very straight speaker. But crime fell, bar fraud. And that's as a result of more investigation into those particularly heinous crimes, sex crimes, offences against the person. So progress has been made. That's as a result of putting more police officers on the streets. I don't disagree entirely with what the Fed said. We do need more officers. We need to back our officers to do the right job. But then it comes back to, as you said, the priorities.
OK, Ranil, Matthew, a full, frank, honest, wonderful start to the show. Thank you very much for being so frank with us.